Well, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, we were about to start living in a different world a year ago tonight. We had heard about a virus spreading, but we had no idea how far it would go and how it would change the patterns of our lives. We'll look back at the COVID year tonight, where we've been, where we're going. We'll also hear the latest on the congressional special elections, a controversy over restaurant tipping, and a bishop's concern about one of the vaccines. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Will Sutton, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate, Kevin McGill, reporter, the Associated Press, and Stephanie Grace, political columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. We're going to go on over to Kevin first, and, things change, ebb and flow with our COVID updates. How are we looking now?
Well, right now, I think one of the most positive signs is that hospitalizations are down to around, I think it's 538, and that's not the lowest it's been, but it's getting pretty darn close to the lowest it's been since the pandemic really took off in Louisiana in late March after Mardi Gras of 2020. Meanwhile, the city, after a virtual shutdown of Mardi Gras this year, had eased up somewhat on coronavirus restrictions on February 26th. And then earlier this week, Governor Edwards said that at least statewide, not in New Orleans isn't following suit yet, but statewide, he made numerous changes, easing up on the coronavirus restrictions. Restaurants and cafes and spas and other businesses, they had been limited to 50% capacity. They're up to 75% capacity now. And one of the biggest changes now, and this is especially big in Louisiana, of course, is live music is going to be allowed to some extent at indoor venues. Again, this is not yet in force in New Orleans. There will be a lot of restrictions, no dance floors. There will have to be either ventilation or setups to make sure that the virus isn't spread by singers. Singers will have to wear masks when they're not singing. There are various options that the venues will have if they have live music for protecting the public from the band or any germs that might be spread by the band. There could be barriers or the ventilation systems. There has to be a certain amount of distance between the audience and the band, but it's a step toward getting us a little bit back to normal, and it comes as the picture in Louisiana and nationwide has been looking better and better, but also amid warnings from some experts nationwide that some of the southern states are going a little too far, too fast. There's some worry that the decline in cases is starting to plateau. There's a worry that it might be going back up. There's been some very serious criticism of Texas and Mississippi for removing mask mandates, which Louisiana has not done yet. And it comes amid this mixed bag of information. We've got the decrease in hospitalizations, always a good sign. The steady rate of percentage of positive cases staying well below 10%, below 5% in a lot of cases. But at the same time, that worry that all those variants that are more contagious are still out there, and a warning even from the governor as he loosens restrictions, saying that we are not out of the woods yet. We've still got to be careful.
You say that there's some that say that we really need to open up more, including some legislators are calling on the governor to go along with our neighboring states and remove the mask mandate.
The governor has been under a lot of pressure since all of this began from conservative and business interests and Republicans in the legislature. There was even, of course, multiple court cases trying to undo some of the restrictions. And the mask mandate stays in place. A simple mandate to make sure that even as we let people get closer together or put more people in a public space, there's maybe a little less chance of transmission of the virus. And it comes also as vaccinations are ramping up. Yeah. We've got over 700,000 people in the state have completed the vaccination series. And I think we're close to at least 1 million having gotten at least one of the 2 shots that are for the most part required. Of course, we got the Johnson & Johnson vaccine coming up. I don't know if the state has received it yet, but it's supposed to start receiving it soon. And that's, of course, 1 shot, which will make things a little easier as well.
But, we still have a long way to go with the vaccination. And so, once again, the health experts say, we need some restrictions in place and we still need the mitigation in place. They keep emphasizing that, masks included, according to the health experts.
And Kevin, Orleans Parish is still one step back.
Yeah, and it's a little hard to do the comparison because they're not talking as much in terms of percentages, but in terms of numbers currently in New Orleans. And these were relaxed. I mean, I remember a few weeks ago, I had the surreal experience of going up on a hotel balcony on Bourbon Street and looking out at an empty Bourbon Street on Fat Tuesday. And the city did cut back or loosen up some of the really heavy restrictions it had back around Mardi Gras time. But there's still gathering sizes for parties and events are still capped at 75 people indoors, 150 outside under the latest restrictions. But they did allow, and this was going back February 26th. They're allowing as many as 15 people at a table inside these businesses, and but still, again, no live music. And closing time statewide and here in New Orleans is still 11 p.m.
Okay. All right, Kevin. Thanks a lot. We'll be keeping an eye on it all. Stephanie, as Kevin mentioned, the J&J vaccine is, here in our area, but Archbishop Amon has some reservations about it.
It does, yeah. And again, I should update that. It has hit. It is being administered in Orleans Parish. I know people have gotten it. It's the one and done. So, it does hold some appeal to a lot of people. You don't have to wait for that second shot. The controversy over it until now has really been its efficacy. The efficacy is very high. It's not quite as high as the other two, Moderna and Pfizer. So there's some concern among public health experts that people might be reluctant to get it for that reason, when in fact most public health people say, look, it's a really good vaccine and it's incredibly effective against hospitalization and death. So the public health messaging is get what you can get.
When you can get it.
When you can get it, as soon as you can get it. Now, in the middle of this, Archbishop Amon came out and said, whoa, if you can get the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, get those, because the Johnson & Johnson, he deemed, the term he used was morally compromised. And that is based on a research method that it was developed using fetal tissue from decades ago, not... And actually, the other two were too, but it's, that was in the research phase as opposed to the kind of production phase. So there's a hair splitting difference, I would argue. That's what I wrote. But I mean, there's real concern that sending the message that this is not something people should get will discourage people at a time when vaccine hesitancy and mistrust and concern is a real issue. And in order to get to herd immunity, you really need to kind of get people vaccinated now and quickly and before these variants can take hold.
And Stephanie, it seems to, see if you agree with me on it. There were various archdioceses and Catholic officials who came out with a similar statement, and yet Archbishop Amon's statement seemed a little bit farther than the others did in urging people away from it.
I think it was more than a little bit farther. I think it was much, for example, the bishops in Baton Rouge and Lafayette, which are actually more conservative areas, one could argue, did not say that. They said, if you can get the other two, get them, but you're fine. If you can get the J&J and that's what you can get it. And John Bell Edwards, the governor, was asked about it. Of course, he's a very anti-abortion Catholic. And he said, look, the common good dictates that you should get it. And really, there are very few other Catholic leaders who have gone as far as the Archbishop.
And the Vatican position on it.
It is not the Vatican position.
No. And the Amon statement it never explicitly said don't get Johnson & Johnson, but it stopped well short of where the others went.
It did. And again, that phrase morally compromised. I mean, if you're a devout Catholic and you are looking for guidance, I have to think that would give you pause. And again, that's the concern.
So, aside from these concerns now, that Catholics may have with these vaccines, particularly the J&J vaccine, the just the general public? Other than that, how are people responding? I mean, they're
From what
trying
we're-
to get it.
From what we're hearing, people are very happy to have it because it's available. I think the floodgates are kind of opening. There is more availability this week than there has been in the past. There are some new groups that are eligible. Hopefully we can move through those groups and move to the next groups quickly. And again, it's a one and done. It's like if you go and you get that shot, you're done.
The J&J is, yeah.
So, and it's also easier to store. There are other advantages. You can store it in a refrigerator for a longer time, and it's the idea is it's kind of easier to get out into some of the locations where they could be doing vaccinations.
And we are starting to see some mass vaccination sites
We are
around.
at the
yeah.
convention center and at
Jefferson
the old
Parish.
the old Zephyr Field, and and
That's
I think
right,
we're
I
just
love
going to keep seeing more of that. Again, things are clicking, and it's exciting to see. And if you remember, President Biden this week said, "Look, I think we're going to have enough to inoculate adults through in May," which is a big improvement over the last estimates. And one of the things that happened with the Johnson, again, a lot of news on Johnson & Johnson this week, Merck, which is a rival pharma company, agreed to produce the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because the government is really saying, this is the one we can get out there quickly. This really helps get us to get everyone inoculated by May deadline. And again, we're in a race against these variants. I mean, that's the important thing.
Okay, Steph, thanks a lot. Well, let's go on over to you. You wrote a piece about how important it is to tip our servers at restaurants. And this is following an incident that happened just in this past week at a local restaurant involving an African-American couple who found that their bill turned out to be a little bit higher than what they were anticipating.
Yes, they were having a date night, this young couple with kids. They decided to go to Desi Vegas in Metairie. Desi Vega also has a downtown New Orleans location. They went to the Metairie location, and from everything I can tell, based on the Facebook post, they had a wonderful evening until they got the bill. And when they got the bill, there was a 20% tip added. They had intended to tip. They go out, it seems, on a somewhat regular basis. But this was something that was unexpected because they're a couple of two, not a party of 6 or 8 or 10. And this was a surprise to them. They did a little investigation and talked with some other patrons and found out the tip had not been added to those bills of white patrons. So I think the couple handled it very well. They were outraged, but not outrageous. And they brought it to the attention of the waiter and then the manager, who both approved of doing it. And were caught in a lie because they said it was the policy and they knew it wasn't. So the owner got involved, and Mr. Vega moved very quickly. So I think he deserves credit for responding positively to make that situation right. But it did raise the matter of tipping. And the whole idea of what is a fair wage and who should be working in what kinds of jobs and paid what kind of wages and based on what. And tipping is so old. There are a lot of hospitality components with the idea of tipping, but it is kind of a wage class matter. And when people don't tip, they're taking money away from the people who we expect to provide them services. I did cite a Cornell University study. It's only one study, but they did study the matter, and they found that there were a number of people who weren't as knowledgeable about tipping, were not as good with tipping as others, including Black folks. About 63% of Black folks and 30% of white folks who weren't really familiar with standard tipping practices, which then accounted for the way people tipped, how often they tipped, socioeconomic considerations, and that caused quite a stir. And right as we're looking about the minimum wage in Congress. So that's a whole nother set of issues, of course.
And with the minimum wage, part of the discussion is should they get rid of the lower minimum wage for workers who are expected to make up the rest of their income in tips. This is part of the whole debate in Congress right now, and I think it's because
That's right.
it is considered problematic in a lot of cases.
But bottom line,
Yeah,
tips are really important
2013
to restaurants. So, restaurant workers is basically what you're saying. It helps them make their living.
Will, I think one
It
thing
is.
that's changing is it used to be you go to a restaurant, you get your check, and it was this piece of paper, and you try to figure out what it is, and even with the best of intentions, sometimes people increasingly are getting these little electronic handheld devices that you put your credit card in, and then that device spells out the tips, and so you point out that when I get 15% or 20%, and so I think it's making people more conscious of what the tips are, especially if the waiter is standing right behind them. But I think that's kind of changing the way that people understand what tips are now.
And so, Will, let's wrap up this
Yeah.
discussion with you. I mean, what did you conclude in your column?
Well, I think that there's, it's a matter of continuous education for folks to know what's expected at a standard mass brand restaurant like McDonald's, Wendy's, or Taco Bell versus going out to a finer dining restaurant and what the tip expectations are. I think it sparked a conversation in this area, and I think a number of owners and managers are looking at that, particularly as Stephanie points out, with the minimum wage and the service worker industry counting on tips so much.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks a lot. Let's go back on over to Stephanie right now. We have some congressional races, certainly in this region. So how is it looking, the second congressional race?
Unusually, 2 out of the 6 congressional districts in Louisiana are vacant right now. One, of course, because Cedric Richmond in the 2nd district got a job at the Biden White House. And then the other, of course, tragically, Luke Letlow, the congressman-elect from the 5th district, died of COVID right before he was sworn in.
Yeah.
So we have 2 on the ballot. March 20th, early voting starts tomorrow, Saturday, so they're coming to a close. They're very crowded races. The 5th district has 15 candidates. The 2nd district has 15. The 5th has 13. That one, there's a real front runner, and it's Luke Letlow's widow, Julia Letlow. So with that many candidates, maybe you won't quite get to the 50%, but I think there's a possibility. In the 2nd, I think there will be a runoff. So the lead candidates in the 2nd, and that's New Orleans, Jefferson, goes up the river to Baton Rouge, are a couple of state senators from New Orleans, Karen Carter Peterson and Troy Carter. They are both very familiar names to people who have followed Louisiana politics. They've been in office for quite a while, both former members of the State House. Troy Carter, also a former member of this New Orleans City Council, and both former candidates for this seat, actually. And then the 2nd tier probably is a couple of newcomers who are maybe a little more liberal, more in the kind of Bernie Sanders mode of politics. Gary Chambers, who's an activist from Baton Rouge, and Desiree Ontiveros is from this area. They're kind of running a little, maybe a little more insurgent candidates. Both of them are newcomers. But the most of the money and endorsements and the attention are going to Peterson and Carter. Carter is the choice of Cedric Richmond, who just left the office. He's getting a lot of endorsements. Karen Carter Peterson's also getting some. She's the former state party chair and has a lot of ties to the National Democratic Party.
Who seems to be running ahead right now?
And, there haven't been public polls. I think it's close. There is some feeling that maybe Troy Carter's a little bit ahead in the polling, but we haven't seen public polls yet. But they both have, their constituencies. She's from Uptown, Central City, Garden District, that area. He's rooted in Algiers, so different neighborhoods. And on issues, they're really very similar. They're both, very big Biden supporters. They both support a $15 minimum wage and all kinds of Green New Deal and the kind of list of Democratic issues. When you get into the weeds, probably Troy Carter is a little bit more open to compromising on some of those things than Peterson. But really, their kind of agendas, it's hard to find daylight between them.
With so many candidates in the race, I mean, we know for sure it's going to be a runoff between the 2 Carter candidates.
Right, who are not related, I should say.
No, okay. But it's going to be how all those other candidates, who none of us can even tell their name, where their vote's going to go.
Right.
And so there's no difference between race or party in this, and so it could be that gender is going to be an
It
important
could
factor
be.
in
I mean,
this.
again, there are some Republicans in the field, but it's a Democratic district, so but I think gender is a lot of people are watching gender because Louisiana hasn't had a woman in its congressional delegation since Mary Landrieu left, so that's 6 years. And of
But
course, there
women have
hasn't
been
been.
doing well in other elections.
Yeah, well, but not in
So
the state so much. I mean, we've had a woman governor, we've had a woman senator, but right now we have no statewide elected officials who are women. The legislature is one of the most male, kind of tilted towards men of any in the country. So we're really not at a good space right now for that. So the idea that there could be one and maybe even two is a big deal. I mean, there hasn't been a woman in the
right.
House district since Lindy Boggs.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That definitely is. Okay, Steph, we'll see. Early voting starts tomorrow.
It does.
Okay,
Yes.
that's right. Thanks a lot. E, over to you. And first, we're going to start with your thoughts about this past year, this COVID year that we've all lived through.
Well, it hasn't been fun. Let me just say that, okay? A year ago, I first became aware of the severity of it on Mardi Gras a year ago when there was a picture in the newspaper of a lone masker in Venice, wearing one of those big nose masks. And the caption said that this is the Venice Mardi Gras. It was canceled. And of course, Italy was being ravaged at the time. And so I said, wow, they canceled the Mardi Gras in Venice? And then we started hearing more and more about it spreading across the United States. And then we were getting these press conferences, and when the governor was putting these restrictions, and I remember his first set of restrictions, they were going to be for 3 weeks. I said, well, this is pretty rough, but 3 weeks isn't too bad, so after 3 weeks, maybe things will be back to normal. Of course, 3 weeks came, and we didn't see things change, and then it went on and on and on, and gradually we got used to it. Remember in the early days, anytime they did anything, they always said, out of an abundance of caution, we're doing this. Well, sooner or later, they didn't need to say that anymore because everybody knew what was going on, and it was more the rule that things were being closed or canceled or shut down than not being. And so that really became part of life here for a while. We saw the importance of, we saw nationwide and certainly locally the importance of governors. That governors really became really key in this and making individual decisions for their state. Our governor, I thought overall, and I'd be anxious to see what Stephanie thinks, he handled it pretty well. I thought he was a pretty articulate spokesman and was good on healthcare issues. But it just went on and on. And as things passed, I think the weekend when this all opened up and people said, this is really serious, was the weekend in mid-March, the weekend when you usually have the St. Patrick's and the St. Joseph's events. And there was a big public party for St. Patrick's uptown, as there always is. And you have all kinds of events. You have parades all over that weekend. And all of it was shut down, and some of it was fairly angrily by the mayor, saying y'all shouldn't be doing this. And so once that was shut down, that kind of showed this is getting pretty serious. And of course, the Jazz Fest and the French Quarter Festival were right behind that. And then those were shut down, but with the caveat, well, maybe we'll see them in October. We'll push them back to October. So that didn't seem too bad, pushing it back to October. Remember, there was a discussion about that, and it never happened in October. And then the big shocker was when the mayor went to a conference and somebody asked about Mardi Gras, about this year's Mardi Gras, and she says, well, that's still on the table too, that we might have Mardi Gras.
So that really drove it home to us all. And so let's start the roundtable discussion about that right now. Kevin, what are your thoughts about this past year?
It's almost too much to try and squeeze into a little time here. I find that with the loosening of restrictions and the fact that vaccines are building up, I'm starting to look ahead and think, what do I want to do in terms of changing the way I work? Yesterday, I covered a court hearing by Zoom. They kind of drove home all the choices that are about to hit. It was the bond hearing for Cardell Hayes, the man who shot the Saints star Will Smith. I covered it by Zoom, as I said. Now, I had been in the courtroom when the verdict came down. I had been in the courtroom when all the testimony came down. It was really a very, as you can imagine, a horribly emotional time for people on Cardell Hayes' family and supporters, for the Smith family. And being at that Zoom hearing yesterday kind of drove home how pays to be in the courtroom and be there and feel the electricity in the air when something like
And
that is going on.
right
And
there.
yet at the same time, watching that Brady Bunch array with Will Smith's widow, who was also shot, and Cardell Hayes, both staring at me
Yeah.
from the screen, it's an interesting way of doing it
It's
also.
definitely. Okay, real quick, guys, because we rapidly have run out of time. Stephanie, over to you. Your year.
Let me pick up on what Errol has said. I actually have a column about this running Sunday about the governor. I think he's done very well. I think, again, because the Trump administration decided to push a lot of decision making down to the states, there's been tremendous variation. It's gotten very ideological in a lot of cases, Democratic side and certainly Republican side, with Texas and Mississippi, as Kevin mentioned, getting rid of their mask mandates. We're not doing that. I think he's been such a steady presence, and the kind of communication has been so clear. You really see his wonky side where he's very into the kind of public health data. He didn't follow Donald Trump, but he followed the health advisors who were saying different things and the kind of more science-based things. And I think he's had such a consistent message that, wearing masks, it's for you, it protects other people. The point is to be a good neighbor.
Yeah,
I think he was built for this, really.
He's been very firm with it, too,
Yeah.
as you said, unwavering. Okay, Will,
Yeah.
your thoughts.
Yeah, I attended a journalism conference the first weekend in March here in New Orleans. Enjoyed the conference in and out. And that Monday, we had our first COVID case in Louisiana. That was rather shocking news for all of us. I found out the next day that an attendee at the conference had been exposed, and therefore I was in that early contact test list. And I ended up being in the first scores of people tested. I had to quarantine. It was a very strange
You had
experience
to wait
because we
forever
hadn't
for
had
your
a lot of
results, I
information.
remember.
Mm-hmm.
And it took 11 days to know whether I was positive or negative. Meanwhile, I'm quarantined in a room with food delivered to me. It was very, very strange. I'm really happy that we're at this point, but it sent a shock to my system so much that I've been in a Sutton slow phase longer than a lot of other people, going through the different phases in the city and the state. I'm very happy about the vaccines, looking forward to being cleared, but I'm very concerned about other people, whether you have the vaccine or not.
Right.
Looking forward to the end of this.
I think we all are. And I know that I am looking forward to having all of you guys back around the table with me again. We've learned how to do this long distance thing, as you've done with court proceedings via Zoom. But it really means so much just to have that interpersonal connection and to talk, looking at one another directly. So looking forward to that day. Meanwhile, thanks a lot for joining us from wherever you are.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for joining us too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.